In the Middle Ages, the weight of justice did not rest in the hands of men alone. It was believed to flow directly from heaven, descending through rituals meant to reveal the hidden truth. Among the most feared of these rituals was the ordeal. It was not a trial, as we understand it today, but a test in which the elements, fire, water, and iron, became instruments of divine judgment. For pregnant women accused of moral failings, the ordeal was often unavoidable. It was thought that God himself would protect the innocent and expose the guilty. The accused might be asked to reach into a pot of boiling water to retrieve a stone or a ring. Her hand, wrapped afterward in linen, would be inspected after several days. If the wound healed smoothly, it was said to be proof of innocence. If not, guilt was declared. Such practices were framed as sacred, yet they placed women under unbearable strain. Imagine the weight of fear, the eyes of the community watching, the whispered prayers that one's body would carry the mark of divine mercy rather than condemnation. It was not only the physical pain that crushed them, but the knowledge that no outcome rested in their own control. In truth, their fate belonged to silence, to fire, to water, and to the judgment of men who claimed to act on God's behalf. At times, the ordeal required carrying a heated bar of iron across a set distance. Each step was heavy, not just with the burn of the iron, but with the dread of what would follow. Even if the pain could be endured, the true test came days later. Did the wounds close cleanly? Did they fester? Entire lives could be redirected by the condition of a hand, as though the mysteries of the soul could be read in skin. The logic behind these trials was not compassion, it was order. In a society where honor outweighed mercy, where reputation was heavier than truth, the ordeal was both spectacle and punishment. Pregnant women were not spared. In fact, their condition made the spectacle more pronounced, for the visible presence of new life was twisted into evidence of guilt. Communities gathered to witness these ordeals. Some came in curiosity, others in fear, and still others in hope that the system might confirm their suspicions. But few questioned the justice of it. To them, suffering was not cruelty, it was proof that divine order was being upheld, that law and faith walked hand in hand, and that every soul was being measured under the gaze of heaven. Yet what truly lingered was not justice, but silence. The silence of those who endured without choice, the silence of the unborn, whose futures were tied to rituals of fire and iron, and the silence of the church, which allowed pain to masquerade as divine truth. Beyond the ordeal of fire and water, medieval society found other ways to brand guilt upon the body. In some regions, punishment was not hidden behind monastery walls or confined to the whisper of courts. It was made public. A woman accused of moral transgressions could be brought to the village square, where the weight of judgment was carried not only in words but in lasting marks. The idea was simple. If sin could be seen, then sin could be shamed. Branding, as it was called, left behind a permanent reminder of supposed dishonor. Though the act itself was swift, its consequences stretched across a lifetime. A woman so marked was never free of the eyes of her community. Every encounter, every glance, every whisper reminded her of the past that society had etched into her very being. Pregnancy outside of marriage was treated as visible evidence of wrongdoing. It did not require testimony or witnesses. The swelling of the body was seen as proof enough, and so branding became a form of punishment that fused body and law together. A mark was not just a scar, it was a statement, a decree that one's life was now bound to the memory of a single accusation. In France, records from Normandy and Brittany speak of such practices, rooted in customs that stretched back to Roman times. There, branding had long been used to signal moral failing or social inferiority. Medieval rulers simply extended the logic. If the body carried the evidence of sin, then the body should also carry the weight of punishment. England, too, had its own methods. Branding was less common, yet public penance was widespread. A woman might be ordered to walk barefoot through the streets, wrapped in a white garment, her head bowed, her voice confessing before neighbors who looked on in silence. Sometimes a rope was tied around the neck, not as a threat, but as a symbol, an emblem of disgrace carried before the eyes of all. Such acts were not confined to a single region. The Holy Roman Empire recorded similar customs well into the 15th century, and church scholars gave their blessing. They argued that punishment was not cruelty, but correction, that public shame was a necessary reminder to all who watched. In this logic, suffering was not senseless, it was sacred. But behind the doctrine lay fear. Fear that moral disorder would spread, that if one woman defied the expectations of her community, others might follow. Fear that the stability of village, town, or kingdom could unravel if discipline was not carved deep and seen by all. And so, women bore the marks of this fear upon their bodies and in their lives. The branding itself was less important than what it represented. The power of society to claim ownership over honor, over morality, over the very skin of those it judged. And once a mark was made, it could not be undone. The woman became a living reminder of the system that condemned her, walking proof of a world where law and shame were bound together. If branding left scars to be carried for a lifetime, other punishments sought to discipline not just the body, but the soul. Among them was the practice of public penance, often reinforced by physical correction. The Church framed it as spiritual medicine, a way to cleanse sin through visible humility. Yet for women carrying pregnancies outside of wedlock, penance was rarely merciful. The records of medieval courts show how these rituals unfolded. A woman judged guilty might be ordered to walk barefoot through her town, dressed in plain garments meant to symbolize purity lost and purity sought. She was instructed to lower her eyes, to confess aloud as she moved along the streets, while the community followed in silence or muttered prayers. Every step was a reminder that she no longer belonged to herself. She belonged to judgment. In some places, this penance was joined by corporal punishment. Whipping or other physical acts were justified as corrections of the flesh, meant to protect the soul from eternal loss. Reformers like Peter Damian argued that such suffering was not cruelty, but salvation, echoing the trials of Christ. To them, pain was a teacher, a purifier, a bridge between sin and redemption. Yet for the women forced into these rituals, the experience was far less noble. The body became a stage upon which moral lessons were performed for the crowd. The pregnancy itself was treated not as a fragile state of life, but as evidence of transgression. Each ritual walk, each strike of the lash, declared her body an object of shame. The unborn child was drawn into this performance, not as a life to be protected, but as proof of guilt. In towns across England and beyond, ecclesiastical courts recorded countless such sentences. The white sheet became a symbol as recognizable as any crown or scepter. To see a woman wrapped in it was to see dishonor embodied, moving slowly across the cobblestones for all to witness. What was framed as penance often functioned as control. The Church maintained its authority not only through sacred words, but through the public display of obedience. Women, especially pregnant women, were made examples. Their silence, their endurance, their lowered heads were warnings to others. This is what awaits those who stray. The crowd, too, became part of the punishment. Their presence turned shame into theater. Neighbors who once shared bread or greeted with warmth now looked on as judges, their eyes reinforcing the sentence even more than the voice of the priest. Penance was never private. It was spectacle, designed to echo long after the procession ended. In this way, penance blurred the line between faith and fear. It was said to bring the sinner closer to God, but it also reminded every bystander of the power the Church held over their lives. Redemption might follow, but so too did memory. A woman could complete her penance, but she could never step again into the streets without recalling the day she walked them in shame. While some women were paraded through the streets in penance, others were hidden away. Behind the closed doors of monasteries and convents, silence became its own punishment. For those accused of breaking vows or carrying pregnancies outside marriage, confinement within monastic walls was a common sentence. Outwardly, it appeared merciful, away from public shame, shielded from the eyes of neighbors. But in truth, this isolation was another form of control. The practice grew alongside the reforms of the 11th and 12th centuries, when the Church sought to tighten discipline over both clergy and laity. To place a woman within a convent was to remove her from temptation, or so it was claimed. Yet the cells where she lived were not retreats of peace. They were austere, stripped of comfort and marked by silence. Days stretched long with prayer, meager meals, and the heavy weight of solitude. For nuns who broke their vows, the punishment was especially severe. A pregnancy inside the convent was seen not only as personal failure, but as desecration of sacred vows. Some women were confined for life, their existence narrowed to a single small chamber where silence replaced freedom. For lay women, too, confinement was used to preserve the honor of families. Daughters from respected households who conceived outside wedlock could be sent into these hidden spaces until childbirth, their condition kept away from the eyes of society. In places like Flanders, northern France, and the German principalities, records describe this quiet exile. Families would petition local authorities or church leaders, asking that the woman be enclosed until the scandal passed. Her fate was decided not for her well-being, but to protect the reputation of those around her. What happened within the walls was of little concern to the world beyond. To the Church, this isolation was framed as mercy. Officials claimed it was protection from shame, an opportunity for reflection, even a chance for redemption. But the reality was harsher. Confinement silenced the accused, cutting her off from family, community, and the rhythms of daily life. Her voice faded, her presence vanished, and with time even her story was forgotten. The conditions of these cells varied, but the pattern remained the same: discipline through solitude. Daily prayers were required, often alongside fasts that weakened the body. The silence of the cloister became a constant companion, pressing in heavier than stone walls. For many, the greatest punishment was not hunger or ritual, but erasure, the slow disappearance of self beneath the weight of expectation. When childbirth came, the cycle often ended with separation. The infant might be given to a foundling home or raised in anonymity, severing ties that could have preserved hope. In this way, confinement within the convent was not only about punishing one life, but about controlling the beginning of another. It was a form of discipline that extended beyond a single body, shaping futures unseen. Thus, within the stillness of monastic halls, countless stories were buried, lives reduced to silence, choices replaced by obedience, and behind it all, the same unyielding lesson. The community's honor was valued above the individual's freedom. For those who were not branded, paraded, or locked away, another fate often awaited: exile. Banishment was one of the harshest sentences a medieval community could deliver, not because it inflicted pain upon the body, but because it stripped a person of belonging. To be cast out meant losing protection, livelihood, and identity. For unmarried pregnant women, this punishment was both common and devastating. A single directive from the parish priest or the council of elders could decide it: leave and do not return. The words carried no trial, no formal defense, no appeal. The swelling of the body was enough evidence, enough reason for judgment. A pregnancy outside marriage was seen as undeniable proof of sin, and the community could not or would not allow such a visible disruption to remain in their midst. In smaller villages especially, reputation was fragile. Every family's honor was bound to the behavior of its members, and the moral order of the community was guarded with vigilance. A woman who carried life outside wedlock was viewed as a threat to that order, a disruption that could spread dishonor if not removed. And so, banishment became both a sentence and a warning. To be exiled was more than being told to leave a home. It was erasure. Friends, neighbors, even family often turned away, unwilling to challenge the decision or share in the shame. The woman became untouchable, as though her presence itself carried contagion. The child she bore was marked before birth, not by choice, but by the silence of those who watched her go. Court records from regions of England, such as Norfolk and Suffolk, describe these practices. Sometimes fines accompanied the sentence, but the exile itself was punishment enough. Without community, survival was uncertain. Without community, a woman was unseen, unprotected, and unnamed. Exile functioned as both justice and forgetting. Once a woman was gone, her story faded from the village memory. Her absence restored the appearance of order, as though the disruption had never occurred. The village remained intact, its reputation untainted, while the exiled bore the cost of maintaining that illusion. The cruelty of exile lay not in physical suffering, but in its permanence. A woman cast out rarely returned. Even if she survived, she was no longer bound to the world she once knew. She had been rewritten as an outsider, her life severed from the community that judged her. Through ordeals of fire and water, through marks upon the skin, through penance in the streets, confinement in the cloister, and exile into the unknown, medieval society revealed its priorities: order over compassion, discipline over mercy, honor over humanity. Pregnant women bore the sharpest edge of this balance, their bodies turned into evidence, their lives shaped into lessons. And though centuries have passed, echoes of these practices still linger in debates about morality, autonomy, and justice. The past whispers that law is never neutral. It is always a mirror of fear, of control, of the fragile structures societies build to protect themselves. And often, the weight of that fear falls heaviest on those least able to resist.